Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and the Gilmore Girls has been a guilty pleasure of mine since I was a teenager. I don't know, it's just kind of fun. I like the characters. I haven't watched it in years, but I remember enjoying it quite a bit more than I should have. But we have an interesting interview from one of the stars of Gilmore Girls who played Luke, who's really coming out about some of the stuff that he endured while on the set in 2003, mainly when it came to sexual harassment. Now, this is kind of an interesting conversation for me, mainly because I think sexual harassment, of course, is a problem. This type of stuff that he's referring to, I wouldn't call sexual harassment. It is part of the job. It is kind of the situation. And it's just a double standard in this case where it's okay for men to have this issue but not okay for women to have this issue. I think that scenes like this, those scenes that he are describing, are okay for both men and women to have in shows and stuff like that because it's part of the job. It's part of being an actor. You do get objectified a little bit as men and women, and I think that's okay, but there is a certain sense of consenting to it that he wasn't given the opportunity to, and Hollywood definitely does have a double standard when it comes to men in situations like this. You can just look at the Marvel movies with the difference between all the shirtless Chris's versus Scarlett Johansson sexualization. It's not even comparable who gets sexualized more. So there is a double standard that this interview points out that I think is an important conversation to have. But at the same time, I don't think the situation that he's referring to is bad enough to really be an issue, whether or not he was a man or a woman. It's really not that big of a deal. It's still an interesting conversation to have nonetheless. And I got this article here from CBR that covers it. Gilmore Girl star says he was treated like a meat stick in disturbing scene. Now, this initially was like, oh yeah, that definitely doesn't surprise me. He was always treated as an object throughout the entire show, and that's a problem that he went throughout a lot of it, especially with the two girls, the Gilmore Girls. And it's interesting that he's finally bringing it up, and specifically about one specific conversation or one specific scene that happened early in the show. Actor Scott Patterson admits on his podcast, I Am All In, that he endured sexual harassment while on the set of Gilmore Girls back in 2003. I definitely wouldn't call what he's talking about sexual harassment. It is in the script, and it's something that he did agree to and didn't, rebuff against. So I definitely would not call it that. It's still an important conversation to have nonetheless about men's rights and the double standard. That's what I want to highlight here is the constant double standard in Hollywood and in our modern world in general, where it's totally okay to do things to men, not okay to do the same things to women. I personally think it's okay for both, but it's an either or situation. Either it's okay for both or it's okay for neither. Hollywood can't make that statement. I think it's okay for both though. And so he goes on to talk about this scene, and it's where they just talk about his butt a lot, I guess. They just talk about his ass a lot during this particular scene. That was which two of his fellow castmates spent time discussing his backside. It was disturbing. I realized it wasn't okay, and it didn't make me feel comfortable at all. It made me really embarrassed, actually, Patterson said in response. It was infuriating to be treated that way. It is infuriating because you're being treated like an object. It's disturbing and it's disgusting, and I had to endure that through the entire scene in many takes. So I've seen the episode that he's talking about. It's really not this bad, so I think he's hurting his point more than he's helping it by coming at it from this perspective. If he had just gone with it nebulously, like throughout the entire shot, or throughout the entire production of the series, he just felt like a piece of meat who wasn't really there to be a character. He was just there to be eye candy for Lorelai. That is an argument to be had, but this specific scene, I think, really doesn't sell it as good as he hopes it will be. They're just talking about his butt a little bit. So it's kind of a weird situation. It is still important, though. Despite my contradictory to his statement, I do think this is an important conversation to have nonetheless. It's all about the butt. They were filming, sitting down, explained it was most disturbing time I had ever spent on set, and I couldn't wait for the day to be over. And again, it is painting him in a bad light by having such a strong reaction to this particular scene when a lot of actors deal with this, and it's part of the job, and it's part of the thing that he consented to, but he should have still... It should still have been a conversation. If it had been Lorelai in the scene, if Lorelai had been the one who, was having close-ups of her butt, if everyone was talking about her ass throughout the entire episode, she would have been given the opportunity to consent to that, but he wasn't. So that is a double standard that is important to be highlighted and would never fly these days. It's like with the Chris Hemsworth situation with Ragnarok. He said he didn't want to do a shirtless scene, but Taika Waititi said, you're just a piece of meat. We're doing it anyway. And that's the perspective of male sexualization in Hollywood. And that's a double standard. And I think it should be totally fine to do the exact same thing to female actors, but It's not anymore. It's definitely a case of sexism. It's definitely a case of sexism. And so the fact that this actor is bringing it up in such a minor way is still important to highlight the double standard. And the double standard in Hollywood is always a thing that I like to call out. There's so many double standards in Hollywood when it comes to men, women, different races, and it's hypocrisy. A lot of the stuff that they do with the diversity and inclusion policies in Hollywood, and this is another prime example of hypocrisy. This would fly in Hollywood every day of the week, and not for women anymore these days. And he said he didn't feel comfortable doing it and it pissed him off. It made him feel incredibly small and like some kind of meat stick. And this is the part that I really wanted to highlight. It's as disgusting for women to objectify men as it is for men to objectify women, and it's as harmful. Now, I definitely don't agree with that, but that is contradicting the double standard in Hollywood, which is the important thing. I've always said it's an all or nothing type situation. Either it's okay to objectify men and women, or it's not okay to objectify either. This actor, he's taking the opposite stance of mine, but it is eliminating the double standard. And I think that's the more important situation to address than us necessarily agreeing. I think it's totally fine to objectify actors in roles who are doing their job and specifically to be objectified, both male and female. I think that's totally fine. He goes at it from the other perspective, but he's still eliminating the double standard. And that is a battle worth having because Hollywood is ripe with double standards. And they'll claim that they're champions for sexism and diversity and inclusion, but then you find out situations like these and you realize that it's never been that way and it's never going to be that way as long as they have these double standards. And if this show came out today, I imagine it'd have a very similar situation going on because we see how, the Marvel movies, as another example, objectify the men involved in those movies and they don't objectify the women anymore. And I think that's disgusting. That's what I think is disgusting out of all this. But him believing that he was just a meat stick is something that I believe is true for the majority of Hollywood actors. Henry Cavill has expressed similar situations and similar disgust at what's going on with his sexualization, and he doesn't necessarily approve of it, but he's not going to be given a choice any more than Chris Hemsworth was in Ragnarok. So this is an important thing for males' rights, at least have a discussion about it, to have their voice be heard in the conversation. Now, this guy is a small enough actor that this really won't affect much, but it is still an important conversation to have because the more people who realize that there is a rampant double standard when it comes to female versus male sexualization in Hollywood, maybe it can make a difference to where either both are okay to be objectified or neither are. And I think that is a good goal to have. And with the whole She-Hulk situation, the actor saying it's a weird thing that people have an obsession with female bodies, with the complete misunderstanding that the male body in Marvel is so much more heavily sexualized than the women have been in decades. So she is just completely unaware of this double standard, and most of Hollywood is unaware of this double standard because they don't value men in that way. It's incredibly sexist. The approach that Hollywood has, that actress for She-Hulk had, is incredibly sexist and anti-male. And so, regardless of my disagreement with this actor, with Patterson, and the way he's going about it, it is important to highlight that to these women and realize, and these Hollywood executives in general, because a lot of men don't really care about men's sexualization either, that it can be devastating and can be dangerous for these men's psyche when it realizes that they're the piece of meat, women can't be. That is what can affect a person's psyche and make things worse. I think it should be both or neither. But overall, I might be a little bit overreacting to this whole situation. I do think it's an important conversation to have, and I do like this actor and this show. And, I think it's strangely relevant with the whole She-Hulk situation and the whole Marvel situation going on currently. I just felt like talking about it for a couple of minutes because of how I cared about the show and these actors, and it is relevant nonetheless. But it may just be a small story that no one really cares about regardless. But I would be interested to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think it should be okay to objectify both or neither? Or are you okay with the double standard existing in Hollywood? Definitely let me know. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Anon. If you like what I do here and want to see good, compelling stories that Hollywood will no longer give you, check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues.
Books 1, Down in Flames, and Book 2, Apocalypse Then, currently on sale. Book 3, Kill the Dark, coming soon.